Have you ever noticed how heavy a life can feel when you are constantly measuring it against a clock that does not even exist? You look around and see people who seem perfectly settled. They have the right job, the right relationship, the right answers. And then there is you, standing quietly in the middle of your own journey, carrying the secret, exhausting fear that you have somehow run out of time. What if the feeling that it is too late to become someone different is not a truth you have to accept, but a heavy illusion you have been carrying for far too long? If you have ever felt stuck, anxious, left behind, or embarrassed by the pace of your own becoming, this is for you. Stay until the end, because the final lesson may change the way you see this pain forever. 1. The weight of the imaginary clock. Here is the truth few people want to face. We live our lives chained to a timeline we did not even write. We are told there is an age to figure it all out, an age to be successful, an age to be certain. But when the reality of your life does not match this invisible schedule, a deep, silent embarrassment begins to grow inside you. You start to hide your true desires. You settle for a life that feels too small, simply because you believe the window for change has already closed. You look at your past and think of it as a series of wasted years, rather than the exact path you needed to walk to arrive at this very moment of awareness. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that much of our suffering arises from attachment. But one of the most painful attachments we hold is the attachment to how our lives should have looked by a certain point in time. We cling to a phantom narrative. We suffer not because our current life is unlivable, but because we are holding it hostage against an imaginary version of ourselves who did everything right and did it early. Imagine a tree deep in the quiet forest. It does not look at the tree next to it and feel shame because it blossomed later in the season. It does not apologize for the harsh winter that delayed its growth, or the dry soil that kept its roots searching in the dark. It simply gathers the nutrients it needs, drinks in the rain, and expands when it is finally ready. A tree knows only one timeline, its own. Yet, we treat our lives as if we are failing a test. You might feel embarrassed that you are starting over in your career while others are reaching the top. You might feel a quiet shame that you are still searching for love or healing an old wound while your friends seem to have moved on. You might feel foolish for wanting to learn something entirely new, or for waking up one morning and realizing that the person you have been for the last 10 years is no longer who you want to be. Ask yourself, whose timeline are you really failing? Is it your own soul's timeline, or is it a schedule handed to you by a world obsessed with speed? What are you afraid will happen if you simply let the clock go? Pause, breathe, observe this feeling of being behind without following it down into the dark. Let the feeling rise, without making it your identity. It is just a thought. It is not your reality. You are allowed to be a beginner at any age. You are allowed to shed a skin that no longer fits, even if everyone else expects you to keep wearing it. Because peace is not something you chase down a predetermined path. It is something you make space for right where you stand. But to find that peace, we first have to recognize that the race itself is a fabrication. And this is where the next truth begins. 2. The illusion of too late. What if the concept of too late is entirely invented by the mind to keep you safely trapped in what is familiar? Here is a painful reality many of us live with. We stay in places we have outgrown. We remain in jobs that drain our spirit, relationships that feel empty, and routines that numb us. We do this not because we are happy, but because we believe the window to change our minds has permanently closed. We look at the years we have invested into a certain identity, and we think, I have come too far to turn back now. The deep embarrassment of admitting we want something entirely different becomes a heavy wall we refuse to climb. We let the fear of judgment trap us in a life we no longer even recognize. In Buddhist thought, one of the deepest lessons is the understanding of impermanence. Everything is in a constant state of flux. The seasons change, the tides shift, and you too are always changing. The person you were 10 years ago is not the person hearing these words today. Therefore, to believe it is too late to become someone different is to deny the very nature of existence. It is a trick of the mind. You are not a finished monument carved in stone. You are a living, breathing process. Think of a river flowing toward the ocean. Sometimes it encounters a massive, unmovable boulder. Sometimes it is diverted into a quiet, stagnant pool for what feels like an eternity. But the water does not look at the obstacle and decide it is too late to reach the sea. It simply gathers its strength, shifts its direction, and carves a completely new path through the earth. The river is not embarrassed by the detour. It understands that the detour is still part of the water's journey. Apply this to your own life. You may feel a deep ache because you spent your 20s building a career you now despise. You might feel a crushing weight because you spent years trying to make the wrong relationship work, and now you are starting over alone. You look at the people around you, and your mind whispers, "You missed your chance." It tries to convince you that your past choices are a permanent life sentence. Ask yourself, are you really out of time, or are you just stepping out of the comfort zone you built for yourself? Is this thought of being too late bringing you peace, or is it only feeding your fear? What would happen if you simply forgave yourself for taking the long way around? Pause, breathe, observe the heavy feeling of regret without claiming it as your truth. Let the feeling rise, but do not let it anchor you. You do not have to carry the weight of the years that are gone. Stop trying to negotiate with the past. You are allowed to pivot. You are allowed to wake up tomorrow morning and decide you are done being the person everyone expects you to be. Not because the past was a mistake, but because it has finally taught you what you needed to know. Because realizing it is not too late requires you to do something incredibly brave. It requires you to drop the heavy armor of your old identity. But releasing that armor brings up a new, quiet vulnerability. And this is where the next truth begins. 3. Releasing the embarrassment of starting over. What if the hardest part of beginning again is not the climb itself, but the quiet fear of being seen at the bottom of the mountain? Here is a truth we rarely speak aloud. Starting over feels deeply embarrassing. We live in a world that praises the finished product, but hides the messy, uncertain process. When you realize you need to change your life, whether that means leaving a career, ending a long relationship, or simply admitting that your old beliefs were wrong, your mind panics. It tells you that going back to step one is a failure. You imagine the whispers of old friends, the pity in the eyes of your family, the awkwardness of explaining why you are suddenly walking away from everything you built. This embarrassment is a heavy chain. It forces many people to stay in a life they no longer want, simply because they are too proud to admit they need a new beginning. Buddhism reminds us that much of our suffering comes from clinging to the ego. The ego is the part of you that desperately wants to look successful, steady, and impressive to the outside world. It builds a rigid identity and demands that you protect it at all costs. But the practice of non-attachment means letting go of the need to appear perfectly put together. It means understanding that your worth is not tied to your titles, your past achievements, or how far along the path you appear to be. Imagine a seed planted deep in the dark earth. For a long time, nothing happens on the surface. While the flowers around it bloom in the sun, showing off their bright colors, the seed remains hidden in the dirt, breaking open in complete silence. The seed does not feel shame for being unseen. It does not feel embarrassed that it is still developing roots in the dark while the rest of the garden is already blossoming. It simply does the quiet, necessary work of growing, trusting that it will break the surface exactly when it is ready. Think about your own life. You might feel a burning shame that you are moving back into an empty apartment while your peers are buying large homes. You might feel foolish sitting in a quiet room, learning a completely new skill from scratch. You might dread the simple question, "So, what are you doing now?" Because your most honest answer is, "I am figuring it out." Your ego wants you to hide. It wants you to feel small and defensive. Ask yourself, who are you actually performing for? Are you choosing to stay unhappy just to avoid bruising your pride? What are you afraid will happen if you simply let go of the need to look like you have it all figured out? Pause, breathe. Let the feeling of embarrassment rise without fighting it. Observe the fear of judgment, and then let it pass like a cloud drifting across the sky. You do not need to explain your new chapter to people who are still reading your old pages. Stop trying to carry the heavy expectation of looking impressive, because peace is not found in maintaining a flawless image. It is found in having the courage to be exactly where you are, even if that place is square one. But accepting where you are is incredibly difficult when you keep looking sideways at everyone else. And this is where the next truth begins. 4. The trap of comparing seasons. What if the heaviest burden you carry is not your own life, but the life you imagine everyone else is living? Here is a painfully common reality. We live in an era of constant, unavoidable visibility. On any given day, you can look through a screen and see the highlights of 100 different lives. You see people celebrating milestones, stepping into success, and easily acquiring the very things you thought you would have by now. Without even realizing it, a quiet, toxic habit begins to form. You start measuring your behind-the-scenes struggles against their carefully curated finished products. You look at your own messy, uncertain reality and conclude that you are hopelessly behind. This comparison breeds a deep emotional exhaustion. It makes you feel invisible, and it blinds you to the quiet beauty of your own steady progress. Buddhism reminds us that suffering multiplies when we lose our presence in the current moment. When you compare your path to another person's, you are pulling your mind out of your own reality and placing it into a painful illusion. You are chasing a mirage. In Buddhist thought, true peace comes from acceptance, accepting that the path you are walking is uniquely yours. Comparison is simply a form of attachment to a reality that does not belong to you. It is the mind refusing to accept what is. Imagine a vast forest moving slowly through the year. You would never expect the quiet, frozen stillness of winter to look like the vibrant, blooming energy of spring. You would never look at a bare tree in January and call it a failure because it is not producing fruit like the trees in late August. Each season has a specific purpose. The cold, dark winter forces the roots to dig deeper into the earth, gathering strength in absolute silence. The spring brings the outward growth only because the winter did its hidden work. Yet, you do not grant yourself this same grace. You might be in a deep, necessary winter of your life right now. A season of resting, of healing an old wound, of quietly unlearning habits that no longer serve you. But you look at a friend who is in the bright spring of a new career or a sweeping romance, and you feel a deep, burning embarrassment. You demand that your winter produce the same bright flowers as their spring. You judge your internal healing by their external success. Ask yourself, are you punishing yourself for being in a season of rest? Are you draining your own limited energy by watching a race you were never meant to run? What would happen if you simply stopped looking sideways? Pause, breathe. Catch your mind the next time it tries to measure your worth against someone else's timeline. Observe the thought without following it. Let the feeling of inadequacy rise, but do not make it your home. Stop trying to force the door open before you have the key. You are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be, gathering strength in the quiet dark for what comes next. But stepping into your next season requires you to leave the past behind. To truly change, you must be willing to let the old version of yourself fall away entirely. And this is where the next truth begins. 5. The courage to shed your old skin. What if the fear of losing who you were is the only thing keeping you from discovering who you could be? Here is a truth we spend our lives running from. We are terrified of our own evolution. Over the years, we build identities that feel safe. You become the reliable one, the one who always has the answers, the one who never complains, or the one who stays on the predictable path. But eventually, that identity becomes a cage. The life that once fit you perfectly begins to feel tight, suffocating, and wrong. Yet, instead of stepping out of it, you shrink yourself to fit inside. You stay in the suffocating skin because you are afraid of the vulnerability that comes with change. You worry about what people will say. You worry that you will lose the love or respect of those who only know how to interact with the old you. Buddhism teaches us that the concept of a permanent, unchanging self is an illusion. We suffer because we cling to the idea that we must remain exactly who we promised to be yesterday. But the practice of non-attachment does not only apply to material things or other people. It applies to your own identity. Letting go of who you were is one of the highest forms of spiritual freedom. Imagine a creature outgrowing its own shell. When the time comes to shed its skin, it does not negotiate with the process. It does not try to sew the old pieces back together to make everyone around it more comfortable. It retreats into the quiet dark, embraces the intense vulnerability of being entirely exposed, and lets the dead layer fall away. For a brief moment, it is soft, unprotected, and entirely new. But it is only through this terrifying exposure that it finds the space to finally grow. Think about your own life. You might feel deeply exhausted from playing a character you outgrew years ago. You might be holding on to a career title because it gives you a sense of worth, even as it drains your spirit. You might be clinging to a relationship dynamic where you are always the one compromising, terrified of setting a boundary because it would shatter the fragile peace. You feel embarrassed to suddenly stand up and say, "I do not want this anymore." You feel the crushing weight of trying to stay consistent for a world that refuses to see your internal shifts. Ask yourself, who are you trying to protect by staying small? Is the fragile comfort of your old identity worth the quiet pain of denying your own evolution? What are you afraid will happen if you simply let the old version of yourself fall away? Pause, breathe. Observe the fear of changing your mind without letting it control you. Let the anxiety rise and then watch it pass. You do not have to be the person you were yesterday. You do not owe anyone a version of yourself that no longer exists. Stop trying to squeeze your expanding spirit into a shrinking box. Because true peace requires the courage to stand in the unknown, completely undefined. But once you step into this new space, a new kind of pain often rises, the heavy grief of looking back at the time you spent hiding. And this is where the next truth begins. 6. Forgiving yourself for the time it took to wake up. What if the heaviest grief you carry is not about what you lost, but about how long you stayed? Here is a strange reality that arrives just as we begin to heal. When we finally gather the courage to change our lives, a quiet new pain often surfaces. Regret. You look back at the years you spent hiding, shrinking, or forcing yourself to fit into a life that was not meant for you. You realize how much energy you gave to the wrong jobs, the wrong relationships, and the wrong beliefs. But instead of feeling liberated by this new clarity, you feel a deep, heavy shame. You whisper to yourself, "Why did I let it go on for so long? Why didn't I see this sooner?" You begin to punish yourself for not waking up earlier, turning your own breakthrough into just another reason to feel inadequate. In Buddhist thought, Much of our suffering is rooted in our refusal to accept what has already happened. The past is not a physical place you can visit. It is a ghost built entirely of memory. When we harshly judge our past actions using the knowledge we have today, we are fighting a war against time that we can never win. Buddhism reminds us to practice profound self-compassion. The version of you that stayed, that endured, and that compromised, they were not weak. They were simply doing their best to survive in the dark, using the only tools they had at the time. Imagine a dense, heavy fog settling over a quiet valley. For days, you wander slowly through the thick grey mist, unable to see more than a few steps ahead. You take wrong turns, you stumble over hidden routes, and you move in circles. Then, eventually, the wind shifts. The sun breaks through, and the fog lifts entirely. Suddenly, you can clearly see the straight, easy path that was there all along. But you would not stand in the bright sunlight and furiously beat yourself for wandering in the mist. You would understand that the fog was real, the blindness was real, and the wandering was necessary until the light returned. Think about your own life. You might be walking away from a decade-long relationship, agonizing over why you did not leave when the cracks first appeared. You might be changing your entire career path late in life, furious at yourself for not pursuing your true calling when you were younger. You take your beautiful, hard-earned clarity and you weaponize it against your old self. You feel a burning embarrassment that you tolerated so much less than you deserved for so long. Ask yourself, are you using your new wisdom as a tool to heal or as a weapon to punish yourself? Is this regret rewriting the past, or is it simply stealing your peace in the present? What would happen if you thanked your past self instead of judging them? Pause, breathe. Observe the heavy ache of regret without following it into the shadows. Let the guilt rise, and then gently release it. Stop demanding that yesterday's self possess tomorrow's wisdom. You woke up exactly when you were supposed to. The time it took to get here was not wasted. It was the precise amount of time required to teach you the lesson so deeply that you will never forget it. But as you forgive yourself for the past, you must face the reality of starting over. How do you walk into this new chapter without feeling foolish? And this is where the next truth begins. 7. The quiet power of the beginner's mind. What if the most powerful position you can ever hold is the one where you know absolutely nothing? Here is a truth we fiercely resist. We despise being beginners. As we get older, we build a heavy armor of expertise. We want to be the person who has the answers, the one who does things flawlessly on the first try, the one who never looks lost. We quietly equate our mastery with our worth. Because of this, the idea of stepping into a new arena where we are entirely inexperienced feels deeply humiliating. We avoid taking a new path, pursuing a different career, or exploring a new passion simply because we cannot stand the awkward, clumsy feeling of not being good at it yet. We let the fear of looking foolish rob us of the joy of discovery. In Buddhist thought, there is a beautiful teaching about the beginner's mind. It reminds us that in the mind of the expert, there are very few possibilities, but in the mind of the beginner, the possibilities are infinite. When we believe we already know how life works, our minds become rigid, closed, and stagnant. But when we willingly empty ourselves of our assumed knowledge, we become open, curious, and alive. Buddhism teaches that the state of not knowing is not a weakness to be hidden. It is a profound, sacred emptiness that allows new wisdom to finally enter. Imagine a small wooden boat that has spent its entire existence in a shallow, quiet pond. The sailor knows every rock, every reed, and every ripple of that small, contained water. But one day, the river rises and carries the boat out into the vast, open ocean. The water is impossibly deep, the currents are strange, and the horizon is completely endless. For the first time, the sailor is entirely lost. They do not know how to navigate the massive waves or read these unknown stars. But it is only in this terrifying, beautiful vastness that the boat can actually sail. The sailor's ignorance of the ocean is not a failure. It is the exact requirement for a true journey to begin. Think about your own life. You might feel a burning flush of embarrassment as you sit in a room trying to learn a new skill alongside people who are decades younger than you. You might feel incredibly foolish attempting to build a new business, producing messy, imperfect work while your inner critic screams at you to stop. You might be trying to learn how to trust again after a deep betrayal, feeling entirely out of place and unsure of how to navigate the shifting currents. You desperately want to rush through this uncomfortable phase and arrive instantly at mastery. Ask yourself, are you letting the fear of looking clumsy steal the beauty of your own expansion? Is your desperate need to appear competent keeping you trapped in a shrinking world? What would happen if you simply let down your guard and allowed yourself to be entirely new? Pause, breathe. Observe the discomfort of being a beginner without running away from it. Let the awkwardness exist without making it mean that you are failing. Stop demanding perfection on the very first step. You are allowed to stumble. You are allowed to ask questions, to fall down, and to begin again. Because true peace is not found in the ability to do everything flawlessly. It is found in the willingness to be a student of life over and over again. But to fully embrace this new space, you have to let go of the phantom timeline you are still carrying in your mind. And this is where the next truth begins. What if the heaviest grief you carry is for a life that never even existed? Here is a quiet, painful trap we all fall into. When our current reality feels difficult, heavy, or out of alignment, the mind does something dangerous to protect itself. It creates a phantom life. You build an intricate, glowing, alternate reality in your head based on all the choices you did not make. You imagine the person you would be if you had stayed in that other city, if you had not ended that relationship, or if you had started that journey 10 years earlier. In this phantom life, everything is perfect. You are on time. You are deeply respected. You are safe. And because you are constantly comparing your messy, unpredictable reality to this flawless illusion, a deep embarrassment settles over you. You feel like a failure simply because your actual life cannot compete with a ghost. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that suffering is born from the mind's refusal to accept reality exactly as it is. We suffer because we cling to things that are not real. While we often talk about clinging to the past or grasping at physical objects, one of the most painful attachments is clinging to an imaginary timeline. In Buddhism, true peace requires radical presence. It requires the understanding that the only life that actually exists and the only place where peace can be found is in the here and now. The phantom life is a mirage. It is a trick created by your fear to keep you dissatisfied and distracted from the present moment. Imagine a sailor on a small wooden boat, moving through rough, chopping waters under a grey sky. Instead of focusing on the sails and feeling the wind, the sailor stands at the edge of the boat, staring out into the fog. In the mist, they see a ghost ship sailing parallel to theirs. It is massive, beautiful, and gliding effortlessly over perfectly calm waters. The sailor is so deeply mesmerized by this phantom ship, so consumed by the burning wish to be on its deck, that they fail to steer their actual boat. They let the real wood rot. They ignore the real wind. They suffer not because their own boat is sinking, but because they are entirely focused on a ship made of mist that they can never board. Think about your own life. You might find yourself quietly agonizing over the version of you that did not make that one critical mistake. You might look at your current circumstances and feel a sudden, crushing grief for a timeline where you chose a different career or stayed with a different person. You tell yourself that the other path would have been easier, that you would have been happier. But this is a trick of the mind. You are comparing your hardest days in reality to a fantasy that has no bad days. Ask yourself, are you mourning a real loss, or are you simply punishing yourself with a daydream? How much of your current energy is being drained by a life you are not actually living? What would happen if you simply let the ghost ship sail away? Pause, breathe, call your attention back to the reality you are actually standing in. Observe the longing for that alternate timeline without following it into the mist. Let the fantasy rise, and then let it dissolve into nothing. Stop holding your real life hostage to a phantom, because peace is not found by wishing you were on a different path. It is found by standing firmly on the path you are on and deciding to finally walk it with an open heart. But walking it requires you to surrender your demands on how life was supposed to unfold, and this is where the final truth begins. 9. Trusting the rhythm of your own becoming. What if the timeline of your life was never something you were supposed to conquer, but simply something you were meant to experience? We began this journey by looking at a heavy, invisible burden, the imaginary clock you have been carrying for so long. We talked about the deep, silent embarrassment of feeling like you are out of time, the fear of starting over, and the exhausting habit of comparing your winter to someone else's spring. But as you stand here now, looking back at the illusion of too late, the truth begins to reveal itself. The clock is a fabrication, the race is a phantom. The embarrassment you feel is just a story your ego tells to keep you safely locked in the past, terrified of your own evolution. In Buddhist wisdom, the ultimate freedom is found in the practice of deep, radical acceptance. Non-attachment is not just about letting go of material things or past relationships. It is about letting go of the desperate demand that life must unfold on your preferred schedule. It is about releasing the rigid script you wrote for yourself and trusting the natural rhythm of your own becoming. When you drop the heavy armor of your expectations, you stop fighting the reality of your life. You realize that inner peace, self-respect, and true presence cannot exist while you are still at war with your own history. Think of the natural world one final time. The dawn does not feel embarrassed that it arrives after hours of darkness. The ocean does not apologize for the shifting of its tides. The earth does not rush its seasons to satisfy the demands of the trees. Everything in nature simply unfolds when the conditions are right, moving in perfect, unbothered harmony. It does not measure itself. It does not judge itself. It only exists exactly as it is. You are no different. You are not broken because you took the long way around. You are not a failure because you are choosing to shed an old, suffocating skin today rather than 10 years ago. Every wrong turn, every quiet, stagnant winter, every painful detour was absolutely necessary to bring you to this exact moment of clarity. You had to live the life you lived to become the person who is finally ready to change. Ask yourself, can you finally lay down the burden of proving yourself to an invisible audience? Can you look at your own journey with all its messy, unpredictable chapters and treat it with reverence instead of shame? Pause. Breathe. Feel the weight of the years you have been carrying, and then simply open your hands. Observe the need to rush, the need to control, the need to catch up, and watch it drift away like smoke in the wind. Stop apologizing for the pace of your awakening. You do not have to be finished. You do not have to have the answers. You only have to be here, entirely present in the beautiful, uncertain middle of your own story. If these lessons touched your heart, share this video with someone who may need a little more peace today. Let life meet you where you are.